Astonished, he moved toward it, and imperceptibly the river moved after him until there was nothing left of the island but the long ship on a last circle of land, with a last rearing snowdrift all around it. Will stood staring. He had never seen such a ship, the long timbers of which it was built overlapped one another like the boards of a fence, heavy and broad. They looked like oak. He could see no mast. Instead, there were places for row upon row of oarsmen, up and down the whole length of the vessel. In the center was a kind of deck-house that made the ship look almost like a Noah's Ark. It was not a closed structure. Its sides seemed to have been cut away, leaving the corner beams and roof like a canopy. And inside, beneath the canopy, a king lay. Will drew back a little at the sight of him. The mailed figure lay very still, with sword and shield at his side and treasure piled round him in glittering mounds. He wore no crown. Instead, a great engraved helmet covered the head and most of the face, crested by a heavy silver image of a long-snouted animal that Will thought must be a wild boar. But even without a crown, this was clearly the body of a king. No lesser man could have merited the silver dishes and jeweled purses, the great shield of bronze and iron, the ornate scabbard, the gold-rimmed drinking horns, and the heaps of ornaments. On an impulse, Will knelt down in the snow and bowed his head in respect. As he looked up again, rising, he saw over the gunwale of the ship something that he had not noticed before. The king was holding something in his hands where they lay, tranquilly folded at his breast. It was another ornament, small and glittering, and as Will saw it more closely, he stood still as stone, gripping the high oaken edge of the ship. The ornament in the quiet hands of the long ship king was shaped in a circle, quartered by a cross. It was wrought of iridescent glass, engraved with serpents and eels and fishes, waves and clouds and things of the sea. It called silently to Will. It was, without question, the sign of water, the last of the 6 great signs. Will scrambled over the side of the great ship and approached the king. He had to take care where his feet moved, or he would have crushed the fine work of engraved leather and woven robes and jewelry and of enamels and cloisonne and filigree gold. He stood looking for a moment at the white face half hidden by the ornate helmet, and then he reached reverently across to take the sign. But first he had to touch the hand of the dead king, and it was colder than any stone. Will flinched and drew back, hesitating. Merriman's voice said softly from close by, "Do not fear him." Will swallowed. "But he's dead." "He has lain here on his burial ground for 1,500 years, waiting. On any other night of the year he would not be here at all. He would be dust. Yes, Will, this appearance of him is dead. The rest of him has gone out beyond time long since." "But it's wrong to take tribute away from the dead." "It is the sign. If it had not been the sign and destined for you, the sign-seeker, he would not be here to give it to you. Take it." So Will leaned across the bier and took the sign of water from the loose grip of the dead cold hands, and from somewhere far off, a murmur of his music whispered in his ears and then was gone. He turned to the side of the ship. There beside it was Merriman, sitting on the white mare. He was cloaked in dark blue, with his wild white hair uncovered. The hollows of his bony face were dark with strain, but delight gleamed in his eyes. "It was well done, Will," he said. Will was gazing at the sign in his hands. The sheen over it was of the iridescence of all mother-of-pearl, all rainbows. The light danced on it as it danced on water. "It's beautiful," he said. Rather reluctantly he loosened the end of the belt and slipped the sign of water on to lie next to the glimmering sign of fire. "It is one of the oldest," Merriman said, "and the most powerful. Now that you have it, they lose their power over Mary forever. That spell is dead. Come, we must go." Concern sharpened his voice. He had seen Will grasp hastily at a beam on the long ship as the long ship suddenly unexpectedly lurched to one side. It rose upright, swayed a little, and then tipped in the opposite direction. Will saw, scrambling for the side, that the Thames had risen still further while he was not watching. Water lapped round the great ship and had it almost afloat. Not for long now would the dead king rest on the land that had once been an island. The mare wheeled toward him, snuffling a greeting, and in the same enchantment, music-haunted moment as before, Will was up on the white horse of the light, sitting in front of Merriman. The ship tilted and swung, fully afloat now, and the white horse wheeled out of its way to stand nearby, watching the river water foaming round its sturdy legs. Creaking and rattling, the long ship gave itself to the rush of the swollen Thames. It was too large a vessel to be overwhelmed. Its weight kept it steady, even on that swirling water, once it had found a balance. So the mysterious dead king lay in dignity still, among his weapons and gleaming tribute, and Will had a last glimpse of the mask-like white face as the great ship moved away downstream. He said over his shoulder, "Who was he?" There was a grave respect on Merriman's face as he watched the long ship go. "An English king of the Dark Ages. I think we will not use his name. The Dark Ages were rightly named, and a shadowy time for the world, when the black riders rode unhindered over all our land. Only the old ones, and a few noble brave men like this one, kept the light alive." And he was buried in a ship, like the Vikings. Will was watching the light glimmer on the golden stag of the prow. "He was part Viking himself," Merriman said. "There were 3 great ship burials near this Thames of yours in days past. One was dug up in the last century near Toplo, and destroyed in the process. One was this ship of the light, not destined ever to be found by men, and one was the greatest ship of the greatest king of all, and this they have not found, and perhaps never will. It lies in peace." He stopped abruptly, and at a movement of his hand, the white horse turned, ready to leap away from the river to the south. But Will was still straining to watch the long ship, and something of his tension seemed to infect both horse and master. They paused in that moment. An extraordinary streak of blue light came hurtling out of the east, not from the thundering sky, but from somewhere across the common. It struck the ship. A great silent rush of flame burst there, over the broad river, its craggy white banks, and from prow to stern, the king's ship was outlined by leaping fire. Will gave a choking, wordless cry, and the white horse stirred uneasily, pawing at the snow. Behind Will, Merriman's strong, deep voice said, "They vent their spite because they know they are too late. Very easy it is, now and again, to predict what the dark will do." Will said, "But the king, and all his beautiful things." "If the rider paused for thought, Will, he would have known that his outburst of malice has done no more than create a right and proper ending for this great ship. When this king's father died, he was laid in a ship in the same way, with all his most splendid possessions round him. But the ship was not buried. That was not the way. The king's men set fire to it, and sent it off burning along over the sea. A tremendous sailing pyre. And that, look, is what our king of the last sign is doing now, sailing in fire and water to his long rest, down the greatest river of England toward the sea." "And could rest to him," said Will, softly turning his eyes at last from the leaping flames. But for a long time afterward, wherever they went, they could see the glow from the blazing longship, whitening part of the storm-dark sky.